Welcome to Infinite Podcast, folks. Your buddy here with Simon. Today we're peeling back the curtain on election promises. Let's dive into how candidates craft those sweet nothings for voters. Ever notice how some pledges seem custom-stitched for certain people? We'll tease out the subtext in political campaigns and chat about what happens in our brains when those big promises vanish like a ghost after the elections. Stick around. It's going to be good. Simon, let's decode this mystery, shall we?
Oh man, Joe. Talk about tailor-made promises. Candidates really seem to have a wardrobe full of them for each group, huh? You ever notice how that works? They're like fashion designers during campaign season.
Absolutely, Simon. It's a classic tactic. Candidates conduct deep demographic research and use data analytics to segment the voter base. For instance, younger voters might get promises of college debt forgiveness or climate action, while older demographics might hear more about Social Security and healthcare improvements. It's all very calculated. Political consultants are akin to marketers creating personalized ads. They measure what resonates with each group, tweaking messages for maximum appeal. It's fascinating and, let's be honest, sometimes unsettling how it plays on our hopes and emotions.
Fascinating and unsettling, more like downright sneaky if you ask me. It's like they're fishing, right? Baiting the hook with whatever shiny lure will get a bite. Sure, promise the moon to the young uns with loan forgiveness, but what about follow-through, huh? Let's talk about those historical promises, Joe. What happened to read my lips, no new taxes, or yes we can? Seriously, we might as well start betting on whether these promises meet reality, because frankly, it seems like a coin toss.
You've hit a nerve there, Simon. It's downright frustrating, honestly. You latch onto these catchy slogans and genuinely believe in them. Read my lips, no new taxes, yes we can. They're not just words. They embody hope for many of us. And then reality hits, promises fall flat, and that trust shatters. It's more than sneaky, it's a letdown, messes with your belief in the system. We all want to trust these folks, but end up playing a guessing game. Will they actually deliver this time around? It stings, man. Feels like they play with our trust like it's some sort of game.
Totally, Joe. It stings like a busted lip from kissing a porcupine. You buy into the hype, you put that sticker on your car, wear the shirt, and then bam, ghosted by campaign promises. I remember feeling that burn, throwing all my chips in because the words hit home. It's rough, like getting stood up on prom night, but with policy implications. Makes you think twice before jumping on any bandwagon, doesn't it?
True, Simon, there's a sting. But let's balance the scales. We can't just pin it on the politicians. Sometimes, change gets gridlocked by other powers in government. It isn't always about broken promises. There are checks and balances, opposition parties, and the courts that can stonewall even the sincerest of pledges. Reality check. No president or prime minister has free rein. Also, some promises are just too ambitious or based on an ideal scenario that doesn't pan out. Economic downturns, global events, shifts in public opinion, these can all derail the best-intentioned agendas. The real problem might be the system's complexity and our expectations for quick fixes, rather than all the blame resting on elected officials' shoulders. There's a lot more red tape behind the scenes than we realize.
I hear you, Joe, but come on. Sure, the system's more tangled than last year's Christmas lights, but let's not give them a free pass. They've got to know the hurdles before making big promises, right? It's like me swearing I'll eat healthy while standing in line at the all-you-can-eat ice cream buffet. Not gonna happen. And about ambition, yeah, shoot for the stars, but maybe aim for one that's, within reach. The over-promising game is getting old. It's like Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. We're all running up to kick it and ending flat on our backs every election cycle. How about some real talk with voters instead of the same old song and dance?
Ha! That's a spot-on analogy, Simon. I mean, how many times will voters let themselves believe in pie-in-the-sky promises before they become cynical, right? Politicians need to stop treating their platforms like a wish list for Santa and start getting real. We need concrete plans, achievable goals, less of the polish, more substance. It's not just annoying, it's damaging to our democracy when leaders play fast and loose with the truth. You promise the moon, and sure, dreaming big is part of the game, but you better have a rocket ready. Otherwise, what's the point? People lose faith, and that's toxic for everyone involved. It's high time for some straight shooting from the folks on the campaign trail.
Right? I mean, look at that whole promising the moon fiasco. If you don't have a spaceship, then quit it with the astronaut dreams. Let's talk brass tacks, practical, doable stuff. The kind of promises you'd shake on at a lemonade stand and know it's as good as gold. Then there's this idea of damaging democracy. Boy, does that hit home. When trust goes out the window, what's left? You've got to wonder if those campaign trail mix-ups are why so many folks would rather binge-watch paint drying than vote. Straight shooting in politics seems as rare as a quiet puppy. It's about time they switch from pie in the sky to meat and potatoes issues. Don't you think, Joe?
Absolutely. Essentials over extravagance every time. Folks want promises that'll actually make it to their dinner tables, not ones that evaporate like steam from a hot pie. They should swap out that moon cheese for something more down to earth, something you can sink your teeth into. That switch is crucial for restoring trust, because without trust, democracy's just an empty word, right? Now, if our listeners have ever felt duped by polished promises or seen through the campaign smoke, I'm curious about their stories. What happens when those earnest vows fade into thin air post-election? There's plenty of meat left on this bone, so let's chew on this, folks. Simon, thoughts?
Oh, for sure. There's so much to unpack with the whole trust issue. And you know, it makes me think about how much media plays into all of this. The gaffes, Joe, those slip-ups and accidental truths that stumble out in interviews. It's like the media's magnifying glass is always waiting for that one moment to go viral. And let's not ignore the moments of glory, too. The power these media moments have over a candidate's fate is wild. Like, remember when that senator got caught on a hot mic? That stuff sticks harder than gum on a sidewalk. Media's been shaping our views on politicians since before we had color TV. But with tech now, it's a whole new ballgame. Thoughts on this beast, Joe?
Yeah, those gaffes are like media gold and can cling to a politician's career like a bad tattoo. But let's not forget the double-edged sword here. The same platforms that amplify slip-ups also offer unfiltered access to voters through social media. No traditional media gatekeeping. The media landscape's indeed changed with technology. It's less about what happened and more about how fast it spreads and who controls the narrative. We've seen character assassinations and saintly portrayals alike, fueling polarized perceptions. Now, don't get me started on what's real and what's spin. It's easy to fall for an edited clip without context. So while media shapes views, we've got some responsibility too, to dig deeper than the 10-second sound bites. Just because it's trending doesn't mean it's the truth. Simon, we've got the tools at our fingertips to see the full picture. So why do you think people still buy into the circus?
You nailed it, Joe. The media is like a chef serving up political bites. If you don't check the kitchen, how do you know what else is in that stew? It's so easy to just swallow those bite-sized gaffes instead of hunting for the whole meal, context and all. And about buying into the circus? Let's be real, circuses are fun. Who doesn't love a bit of drama, especially when you can scroll through it during your coffee break? But here's the kicker. While we're all soaking up those gaffes and goofs, the real issues might be getting lost in the sauce. Seriously, we've got this digital age with information overload, but people seem to treat it like fast food. Quick, easy, and not always good for you. How many times have we seen someone's rep get fried over something out of context? And on the flip side, how often does a slick campaign dodge the tough questions because they control the narrative? We live in a DIY fact-checking world, man. You'd think we'd use it more often. But where's the fire? Are most folks really diving deep, or are we just rubbernecking at the fender benders? It's a two-way street with media shaping perceptions. It isn't only on them, it's on us, the consumers, too. What happened to a little journalistic digging, eh, Joe?
Isn't it something, though? A politician trips over their tongue, and it's a week's worth of memes and headlines. Yet policy debates might not trend for even a day. Are we really so hungry for entertainment that we'd rather watch the gaffe reel than the serious dialogue? The thirst for drama could be drowning our focus on real issues. Maybe we all need to step up our game, Simon.
Totally, man. It's like we're addicted to the political blooper reel while the director's cut, the real substance, gathers dust on the shelf. If only folks got as fired up about policy as they do about a good facepalm moment. Imagine that world.
Simon, imagine if we took half the energy put into meme making and applied it to scrutinizing policies. Public knowledge would skyrocket. For instance, let's take national budgets. They often fall by the wayside in the mainstream media narrative because they're not sexy enough, right? But think about it. Fiscal policy directly impacts everything from defense spending, education, infrastructure, healthcare, to social programs. Then there's climate change. According to NASA, global temperatures have risen by about 1.18 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century. That fact alone should dominate headlines and influence how voters perceive candidates' environmental policies. And remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal? It revealed how personal data can be used to manipulate voters, a critical talking point that too often gets buried by the next viral gaffe. The exposure of such manipulation should have been a wake-up call regarding technology's role in politics. It says a lot that our digital literacy isn't keeping pace with the evolution of media platforms, meaning deep dives aren't as common when everything's rapid fire. We're at this weird crossroads where the information is infinite, yet the depth of public debate seems more like a puddle than an ocean.
Sure, budget talk isn't headlining Coachella anytime soon, but here's the punchline. Without knowing where the cash flows, our votes are just shots in the dark. And climate change? It should be hotter than a TikTok dance challenge, not stuck on the B-side of news tracks. Cambridge Analytica-style scandals? That should have flipped the table on voter manipulation chat, yet somehow it's like finding Waldo when it comes to keeping that in the limelight. Digital literacy is another can of worms. We're in this information Wild West. Everyone's got a six-shooter full of data, but no one's quite sure what to aim at. You'd think we'd all be Wyatt Earp by now, rooting out the bluff from the real deal. If we're not careful, we'll keep mistaking deepfakes for documentaries and policy debates for pillow fights. Gotta gear up our brains and push past the gaffes, or we'll stay locked in this weird game of political whack-a-mole.
If people treated elections like they do fantasy sports leagues, analyzing stats and player history, we might just tackle those real issues instead of getting sideswiped by every on-air flub.
You know, fantasy sports fans dive deep into every player's stats. Imagine debating fiscal policies with the same zest. If political slip-ups scored points, we'd all be league leaders by now.
I remember, back when I was in college, we had this public speaking class. There was one guy, let's call him Mark the Magnificent. He had the gift of gab, but his preparation was optional. One speech, he aimed to inspire us about the importance of conservation, but instead of proclaiming the dangers of deforestation, he declared a war on decaffeination. Instant classic. The room erupted, and you know what? He rolled with it, joking about how life without caffeine might just be the wake-up call we need for environmental action. Turned a gaffe into gold. It stuck with me because that's what resonates, not the polished facade, but the authentic cracks that let the light shine through. If only more politicians could take Mark the Magnificent's lead and connect over their own coffee slip-ups, maybe voters would feel closer to the issue and the person standing for them.
Mark the Magnificent, huh? What a legend. You know, Joe, politicians could learn a thing or two from Mark. When they goof, too often it's damage control mode, all serious and no play. But why not own it like our decaffeination warrior? Think about it. If during a big speech a candidate says all citizens deserve free Wi-Fi, but bungles it as free waffles, lean in. Promise syrup reform while you're at it. Could you imagine? Instead of backpedaling, picture a campaign rally where that flub turns into handing out actual waffles. They'd be breakfast and broadband champions. It's about time these spin doctors inject a sprinkle of humor and humanity into their response playbook. Voters love realness. So next time there's a blunder, hey, instead of a 10-car strategy pileup, throw a parade for authenticity. The voter might just end up loving you for being more pancake than politician.
That waffles to Wi-Fi slip could have been a historic internet policy discussion, if it had happened, which it sadly didn't. But real talk, When linguistic lapses do occur, they're an opportunity to showcase authenticity and relatability. Take, for instance, the potato incident with Dan Quayle in 1992. A simple spelling correction turned into a political gaffe still mentioned decades later. Now, humor wasn't his salvage strategy at the time, but imagine if he'd laughed along saying, "Looks like I need spell check as much as you need pencils," or gifted erasers to classrooms. Pure gold. Politicians can flip the script on blunders. Remember when Obama joked about his first debate performance in 2012 by acknowledging he can't perform flawlessly, just like I can't promise that the Lakers will always win the preseason? Light, relatable, it worked. Humanizing moments resonate. They tear down the walls politicians often hide behind. Transparency carries weight in an era where over 90% of adults find honesty important in a public leader, according to a Pew Research Center study. Suddenly, those spin doctors laughing off the occasional waffle are likelier to serve up a candidate voters want to have breakfast with, and maybe even vote for.
Absolutely. A candidate who can joke about their own potato is more appealing than some stiff in a suit. Plus, if you can't trust someone to misspell breakfast, are they really human? I say bring on the bloopers. It's high time our leaders showed they're prone to the occasional waffle. Makes them one of us.
You got it, Simon. Here's a thought. How about we turn Election Day into National Waffle Day? Votes with a side of syrup. That'll sweeten the turnout.
National Waffle Day meets Election Day, eh? How about we do one better? Set up debate stages at local diners, hash out policies over hash browns. Each flub gets you a dollop of whipped cream on the mic. Might get messy, but you'd have people lined up around the block to vote, and not just for the free toppings. Though, let's chew on this for a second. Would our focus drift from policy substance to just stacking up the laughs? On the flip side, if gaffes gave us more face time with those who stir the political pot, maybe the spin would be sweeter and the comedy side dish could actually feed into serious discussion. Jokes aside, it's really about flipping that script and spicing up dull speeches. Add rib-tickling honesty. Otherwise, we're all just left starving for some sincerity in politics.
Diner debates could truly be the special of the day, Simon. Amid the laughter over a stack of pancakes, there might just simmer a new kind of political engagement. Golden moments of honesty served sunny side up. That's food for thought. What's next on the menu of unintended political humor?
Speaking of diner debates and the authenticity of politicians, Joe, this always gets me. We talk about pancake flipping, but when it comes to policymaking, it's all about flipping positions. Platforms sparkle during campaigns, then come down with the election bunting. Take campaign trails. It's like a buffet of ideologies. You get a little taste of everything. But once someone's in office, the menu changes. What happened to that vegan option you promised, huh? Now it's all meat and potatoes, realpolitik. Sticking to your guns, ideologically speaking, is as rare as finding a movie without a sequel these days. It's a constant tug of war between sticking to your threads or adapting to stay dressed for the part. Makes you wonder, is rigidly clinging to an ideal helpful, or does being flexible serve the greater good?
Hey, fresh ears. We're dishing on political promises, the kind that light up campaign trails but sometimes fizzle out in office. Think of it like a diner's grand opening sign boasting the best vegan options in town, but once you're seated, the only thing on the menu is meatloaf. It's the age-old dance between ideals and reality in politics. Do politicians stick to the plan or mix it up to make things work? Stay tuned as we chew over whether staying ideologically pure is the secret sauce or just a recipe for gridlock. Now back to our chat. Flexibility might just be the key ingredient in governing, Simon. Sure, holding firm to certain principles is noble, but when rubber meets the road, or let's say the kitchen gets hot, you've got to cook with what's in the pantry, not just what was on the shopping list.
Spot on, Joe. Mix it up too rigidly, and you end up with a burnt dish. Adapt the recipe, though, and you might just cook up something crowd-pleasing that sticks to the spirit of the original menu.
Funny you mention adapting recipes, Simon. Brings me back to one of my early cooking experiments. I wanted to make my grandmother's famous chili, had the recipe and all. Halfway through, I realize I'm out of cumin, a cornerstone spice, right? Here's where it gets interesting. I improvise with a bit of smoked paprika. It's not what Grandma wrote down, but guess what? The new chili version was a hit. Kept the spirit, made it work with what was in stock. It reminds me of how some politicians maneuver once they're actually stirring the pot in office. They've got Grandma's recipe, the campaign promises, but ingredients change, and so does the dish. As long as the essence remains, turns out most folks don't mind the twist. The magic is in knowing when to stick to the recipe and when to let the pantry inspire you.
Sure, improvising in the kitchen can create a hit dish, and adapting policy might keep things moving. But hold on, what about voters' taste buds here? If they showed up for cumin and got paprika, some might call for the chef's head. Isn't there merit in delivering what you've advertised? Take environmental policy pledges, for instance. Say you run on cutting emissions, but then cut deals with big oil post-election. That's not just tweaking the recipe, it's swapping out the main course. Folks voted for cleaner air, not smog with a side of broken promises. So while flexibility has its place, to a point, let's not forget the peeps who like the menu as it was. When does adapting become ditching the diet plan voters signed up for? It's a fine line between a nifty twist and losing the plot, or in this case, the pot. Feed them something too different, and it won't matter how great it tastes. They didn't order it.
Honestly, Simon, that hits home. We vote with hope, don't we? When those hopes aren't met, it feels personal. It's like getting psyched about a concert for months. You show up and the band plays new songs all night. What about the classics we all came for? That pledge to policy switcheroo on serious issues like climate change, no doubt, leaves a bitter taste. It's downright gutting. Because that's our future, our kids' futures, hanging in the smoky balance. It's moments like these when the line gets crossed. It stops being about practicality and starts feeling like betrayal. Voters can deal with spice adjustments, but completely changing the course? That's when trust in the kitchen crew starts to crumble. And betrayal doesn't sit well in anybody's recipe book.
Here's a little seasoning for thought. If politicians were as committed to their policies as dogs are to chasing squirrels, we'd live in a very different world.
Oh, you've uncorked a vintage memory there, Simon. Back in the day, I had this determined little bulldog named Tank. That dog was something else. He'd sit by the window, laser-focused on the yard. The second he spotted a squirrel, it was game over. He'd bolt out, chase with unbridled determination, and, you wouldn't believe it, actually caught one once. I brought Tank up because his singular focus reminds me of what we'd wish from our leaders. Unwavering commitment to their pursuit, whatever it is they've promised us, the voters. Yet unlike my four-legged friend who never wavered, at least when it came to squirrels, those at the helm often have more complex yards to scan. Sure, the promised squirrel is there, captivating during campaigns, but post-election the yard's full of distractions. And those distractions sometimes mean that the squirrel gets away. It's a jarring shift when the policies they doggedly chased take a back seat to other critters that weren't even in sight before. Now, I'm not saying all distractions are bad. Sometimes they need attention too. But gotta wonder, if politicians had Tank's chase one squirrel dedication, how might that reshape our landscape? Maybe a less convoluted, more predictable political park for us all to play in.
Ha, political chess moves? Ever get the sense candidate announcements are less like chess and more like battleship? They lob over these policy positions, testing waters, shouting out coordinates, but half the time it's a miss. Then there's the grand strategies they announce with fireworks. Boom, B6 got your battleship. Everyone's cheering until you realize, wait a minute, was that actually part of the game plan, or just them hoping for a lucky strike? Look at campaign promises, as strategic as they come. But it's not about taking down the king. It's win the crowd, sacrifice pawns, protect your queen, be 3 steps ahead. And what happens once elected? Those strategy-filled announcements are suddenly, let's play again, because the board Game of Thrones ed and left kings in checkmate. I'll give you this, though. When decoding these politically savvy algebra equations masquerading as campaign trails, the best move isn't always about the checkered board. It's about knowing when to throw the playbook out the window. It's those unpredictable, human moments that resonate. like blitz chess, off the cuff, a real scramble. That's where you see someone's true strategy under pressure. Maybe we need more lightning rounds in politics. So do tell me, Joe, with all this strategizing, sidestepping, and gambiting, have we lost sight of the straightforward path from promise to action? Or is this gyroscope dance exactly how candidates master the board, or should I say the ballot box?
Indeed, imagine politicians playing literal battleship with their policies. We'd be dodging policy torpedoes left and right. Kaboom! Universal healthcare just sunk my battleship. It'd certainly make elections more gripping, wouldn't it?
Ever think campaign announcements are like unscheduled pop quizzes? Surprise! Here's what you're dealing with now. No studying, no warning. Next question, please.
Campaign announcements popping up are like those whack-a-mole games at carnivals. Suddenly there's a new contender and bam, you're expected to swing your mallet with an informed opinion. No studying, indeed. Can we get a syllabus over here, please?
Whoa, hold up. A syllabus would mean they're following some master plan we could study. Who says the game's not rigged? These surprise announcements are less about strategy and more about shock value, hoping you'll miss the details while you're dazzled by the fireworks. And historical events shaping tactics? That's the social media playbook. It's like they've got a crystal ball tuned to Twitter trends or something. Got a natural disaster anniversary coming up? Watch someone announce a climate initiative. Stock market takes a dive. Suddenly, it's economic reform day. Makes me wonder, are candidates playing 4D chess or just throwing pawns at us hoping we don't notice the missing pieces? Because let me tell you, my mallet is ready, but sometimes the moles are too quick, or too many.
Hang on a sec, Simon. Sure, social media can amplify the opportunistic side of politics, but there's another angle to consider here. Sometimes launching policy ideas around significant dates isn't just about manipulation. It's actually pretty savvy strategy that taps into public sentiment. Take climate initiatives announced on an environmental disaster anniversary. It's not just fishing for likes. It's leveraging a moment when people are reflecting on an issue they care deeply about. It's giving a platform to something that has already grabbed the public's attention. This timing means you're more likely to have a captive audience, one that's emotionally invested and perhaps more willing to engage. In essence, it's not just pandering, it's strategically dropping a beacon where the light is needed most. Done right, it can illuminate issues at a time when people are most receptive. That's chess, not checkers, anticipating player engagement, not just chasing the shock value.
You've got a point, Joe. Riding the wave of public sentiment makes sense. But isn't it also about painting the perfect picture to get their king across the board? The timing, location, it's all setting the scene, right? I mean, look at candidates announcing in small, struggling communities when talking jobs. It's not just background aesthetics. They're embedding themselves in a narrative that says, I'm with you. And historical events? They're like ghost pieces on the chessboard of today. Announce something bold on the anniversary of a major event, and you link arms with history. Suddenly, your campaign is part of a longer story. Then there's social media, less about depth, more about reach. Strike viral, frame the narrative, position yourself as the hero in 280 characters or less. That's no deep philosophical dive. It's skimming stones across the digital pond, hoping they skip far enough to garner attention. Strategic? Absolutely. But let's not forget the unintended consequence, a spectacle-driven politics that might sacrifice sincerity for stagecraft.
Absolutely, it can feel like a high-wire act, balancing genuine interest in issues with political theatrics. Now, envision those announcements as trailers for the next big political blockbuster. Will it be a hit or a box office bomb? The suspense is real.
So, in this world where every policy drop is a potential summer blockbuster trailer, how do we, as voters, separate the real epic sagas from the flashy duds?
Here's a different take. We're savvy viewers now, adept at sifting through trailers for nuggets of substance. It's like separating art films from explosive fluff at the box office, but with stakes much higher than ticket sales. Voters scrutinize records over rhetoric, weighing the promises against what's practically achievable. They peek behind the curtain to assess genuine alignment between a candidate's words and their actions. Plus, grassroots movements keep narratives honest by spotlighting big talk without the walk, and facts still matter. Despite flashy presentation, those who dive deep into policy proposals can unpack the glittery wrapping and evaluate the merits of each plan. The real sagas stand test of time, holding up past the trending hashtag window. In essence, voters are becoming sharper critics in the political theater, less likely to be swayed by showmanship alone, seeking out narratives indicative of sustainable impact rather than transient pomp.
Whoa, wait a sec. You're saying folks actually look past the flash to find the substance? Just when you think it's all hype and hashtags, turns out some voters are deep diving like policy detectives. Man, if that's true, hats off to them. That's real commitment. Candidates might be playing 4D chess with emotional appeal, but voters? They're not just staring at the board. It's like they've got those magnifying glasses out and they're studying each piece, tracing the fingerprints. Sure, emotion gets you in the seat, but once you're there, it seems people want more than popcorn. They want a story they can believe in. And these political blockbusters, sometimes I guess the box office isn't fooled.
Well, Simon, it sounds nice, but let's toss in a dose of realism. We say voters want substance over flash, yet sensational headlines often drown out the quiet voices of nuance and detail. Thinking all voters are policy detectives? That's wishful thinking. True scrutiny is tough. It requires time and effort that many folks simply don't have to spare due to life's demands. We're creatures attracted to brightness, action, and drama. It's baked into our DNA. Candidates know this. Their splashy announcements aren't just for vanity. They're calculated moves to snag those with flickering attention spans. Sure, there's a contingent of deeply engaged voters tracing the fingerprints, as you said, but they're not the whole audience. And believe me, candidates play to the entire theater, not just the front-row critics.
Sure, there's that tribe of well-informed crusaders, but let's be real. The magic lies in that moment when a political stunt backfires, and suddenly, it's open mic night at the fact-checking comedy club. Now, isn't that the show everyone waits for?
Okay, when a political stunt nosedives, it's spectacular, like watching a grand fireworks finale fizzle out. One notorious instance: in 1988, Michael Dukakis's tank ride was meant to bolster his military creds. Instead, it backfired with endless parodies, undermining his serious image. Then you've got Howard Dean's 2004 Dean Scream. Meant as a rally cry, it became an internet meme that tarnished his campaign. Yet, voters are becoming aware of these missteps in real time, thanks to social media and fact-checkers. With platforms like PolitiFact or factcheck.org, keeping tabs on politicians' track records and promises. More than ever, there's this space where the electorate can watch, almost as a spectator sport, the unraveling or reinforcing of a political narrative shaped not by what's just said on stage, but also by the collective verdict of the instant online public jury.
Well, those stunts sure make for great fail compilations, don't they? But the real kicker is when the crowd gets it wrong, like judging a book by its hilarious cover. Take candidate slip-ups turned into memes. It's easy to laugh off someone tripping over their tongue, but are we missing the point? A gaffe during a speech doesn't necessarily nuke someone's capacity to govern, right? It seems like our hyper-connected world prioritizes viral blunders over nuanced debate. And that's risky. Makes you wonder, are we electing leaders or just crowning meme lords? That tank incident with Dukakis or Dean's infamous scream, they're legendary flubs, but not exactly reflective of one's ability to run a country. Yet here we are, using these moments as shorthand for capability. Is this really a sound strategy? Aren't we smarter than that? Or should I say, shouldn't we be more strategic about what really matters?
Definitely, Simon. Laughter over a political slip can echo around the internet, but that doesn't paint a full picture of the candidate's abilities. It's tricky. We think these gaffes cut right to the chase, showing us who's fit to lead and who isn't. Yet, they rarely touch on the real issues. Looking at it from a distance, true mastery in political chess might not be about avoiding blunders. It could be about knowing how to recover from them. After all, it's the recovery, the pivot after stumbling, where a leader's strengths truly shine, right? Maybe the deeper question is, how much should we let those memeable moments sway our judgment? Do viral missteps really merit being such deal breakers? Listeners, what do you think? Where's the line between entertaining flubs and substantial faults?
You know, it always makes me chuckle. Isn't it wild how politicians cozy up like they're old school pals backstage at a rock concert, only to form alliances that are more smoke and mirrors than fire?
Chuckling aside, Simon, those backroom handshakes aren't just spontaneous jam sessions. They're chess moves. Parties weigh every alliance against a future checkmate on policy. Each handshake represents a potential endorsement, funding stream, or a pivotal voting bloc that can turn the tide in an election and shape platforms. It's a calculated dance where each step is meant to advance positions on the board. But let's poke at it. Are these alliances built on shared vision or mutual convenience? When push comes to shove, it's often about securing power, not ideology purity, isn't it? And how does this matchmaking affect us, the constituents? Is it always for our benefit, or sometimes just political theater at its finest? Now I'm curious what smoke they're using. It better not be from burning policy pages.
Ah, Joe, mutual convenience hits the nail on the head. These backroom deals, they're less about star-crossed political lovers and more like speed dating at the power grab ball. These alliances, it's like they're cross-stitching a patchwork quilt of interests. Sure, they thump their chests with noble talk about common goals, but at the end of the day, it's all about stitching together enough support to warm their own political ambitions. Sometimes, though, don't you think we just become pawns in their Game of Thrones? I mean, while they're securing thrones and scepters, are our needs fully represented? And when these stitched-together ideas hit the real world, rip, the seams can burst because they weren't really woven from the same cloth. Packaged policies emerging from these secret handshakes often look good at a glance, but ever try to wash them? Suddenly, the colors run, and you're left with a policy sweater 2 sizes too small. It's fascinating, if a bit unsettling, right?
Unsettling is one way to put it, Simon. These alliances, while pragmatic for the politicians, can sometimes turn voter interests into bargaining chips. The intention might be to get things done, but when those secret handshakes dictate platforms, voters are often left in the dark until the grand reveal. Did we sign up for this? Were these the policies and compromises that were campaigned on? However, let's flip the coin. Without some give and take, would policymaking grind to a halt? Maybe efficiency isn't so bad after all. But then again, who's ensuring the sacrificed pawns are not our key services or environmental protections? It's about striking a balance between getting things done and maintaining transparency. Where's the oversight in this game? Some players seem too focused on their next move instead of the health of the board itself. At the heart, it begs the question, should there be more clarity in how these alliances form and what they promise to different factions? Right?
I've got to ask, Joe, when did transparent government start meaning we can sort of see through it if we squint? It's like trying to read fine print without your glasses on.
Ah, transparent government, Simon. It's like when you buy one of those mystery bags. They say it's full of treasures, but more often than not, you just end up with a bunch of keychains and a flashlight that doesn't work. Sure, we can see something inside the bag, but good luck figuring out if it's gold or glitter before the purchase. Transparency in this case might just mean we get to watch the deals happen in HD. Doesn't mean we're getting the director's commentary explaining the plot.
Gold or glitter. Joe, that's spot on. But isn't it sad we're almost okay being the chumps at a magic show? Look here, not there, and poof, policy. They flash us these alliances like they're pulling rabbits out of hats, but who gets the hat trick? Us. They cut education funding but preserve tax breaks. Ta-da! We need less illusion, more info. And about that HD transparency, more often it feels like those nature documentaries with dramatic lighting. Sure, it's pretty to look at, but does a fancy camera angle really help you understand the ecosystem? Bottom line, if politicians treated alliances and policies more like recipes shared with family rather than secret sauces guarded by dragons, maybe we'd actually get to feast on some progress.
Let's peel back the curtain on these political alliances a bit more, Simon. Consider how caucus groups within larger parties sway policy platforms. These intra-party groups, think of the Progressive Caucus or the Freedom Caucus, leverage their collective voting clout to nudge party manifestos closer to their ideologies. Or let's scope out interest group coalitions, with lobbyists and industry leaders assembling over steak dinners to try and influence legislation. There's the military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned us about. It's a textbook case. Defense contractors aligning with legislators, pushing for policies that might not chart the most peaceable course for the nation, but sure keep the factories humming. Even at international levels, alliances shape policy in ways unseen by many citizens. Look at trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Negotiated in private, such agreements can have line items that alter entire sectors of an economy, affecting jobs, environmental regulations, digital rights, etc. So viewers are watching this series piped directly into their living rooms, but often without the chance to script edit or even add annotations. No wonder there's a craving for more info. Transparency should be more about dialogue and participation than just revelation, because when the credits roll, we're the ones left in the theater dealing with the aftermath of the show.
And you've got to wonder, Joe, these steak dinners, with all this backroom buttering up, does anyone check if the steak's even good? Or are they just serving us reheated leftovers and calling it gourmet policy cuisine?
The real flavor test comes with public opinion, Simon. If voters spat out the policy steak after a bite or two, you've definitely got to question who's in that kitchen and what recipes they're using.
Exactly, Joe. And I'm thinking, who gave those chefs their hats? Because last time I checked, we didn't vote for a taste test. We ordered up real, substantial meals. I'd bet half those policy steaks are all sizzle, no steak. Probably cooked rare when we asked for well done. Sure, alliances shape policies, but shouldn't they at least match the menu we were shown during campaign season? Talk about false advertising. Vote for this and get that? It's like ordering an epic burger and getting a sad veggie patty instead. Surprise, not what was on the poster outside, folks. Transparency's great and necessary, but it's only the first course. What we need is accountability for dessert.
Absolutely, Simon. Voters should definitely get what's on the menu. And if those secret handshake deals are flipping our orders, we ought to know who's changing up the recipes. Whether we're getting gourmet reforms or microwave minute policies, it boils down to holding these chefs accountable for their kitchen conduct. I mean, is it too much to ask that our political dinner matches the advertised specials? Listeners, let's chew on that. Ever feel like policy dishes served up aren't quite what you ordered?
Speaking of getting served unexpected dishes, Joe, it seems like the only thing voters might enjoy more than a well-prepped policy dish is a good old campaign blooper. It's that candid, unscripted stuff that sometimes flips the script on a candidate's image, right? Let's pivot to the lighter side of politics and talk about those candid camera capers we've seen over the years. Those slip-ups that somehow make a candidate seem more human and, oddly enough, more likable, like they're just another person at the barbecue who accidentally flipped a burger into someone's lap. Ever have a chuckle over one of those, listeners?
All right, so there's this time I'm thinking about. It's classic. A city council candidate in my town was all set up for a community meet and greet at the local park. He's got his suit on, trying a bit too hard to look the part. There he is, delivering what was a very rehearsed speech on fiscal responsibility. Mid-sentence, wouldn't you know it, the sprinkler system goes off. So there he stands, absolutely drenched, papers flying everywhere. But instead of getting flustered, the guy starts laughing, gathers his soggy notes, and jokes that he's now fully transparent. Quite literally. And folks, this is why we need better infrastructure. The crowd loved it. They ate it up. He went from stiff to the star of his own comedy show in seconds. It was a blooper turned into a moment of pure relatability. You gotta wonder if bloopers like that aren't sometimes the best PR moves out there, accidental or not. What do you say, listeners? Ever seen a political faceplant that turned into an unexpected win?
Oh, that's a riot, Joe. But come on, let's be real. They say every politician has 9 lives, but some of these bloopers are more like career cliffhangers. Sure, getting drenched can wash away the stiff image, but not all who slip can turn it into a dance, right? Take, for instance, the candidate who mixed up states during a speech. Classic. and cringeworthy. Instead of endearing, they just looked clueless, like someone trying to cut steak with a spoon. Or there's the one who tried to pose with farm animals for that down-to-earth look and ended up being chased by a turkey. Funny? Yep. Vote getter? Jury's still out. So listeners, do tell, when is a blooper a boon and when does it backfire? Ever seen that awkward stumble morph into a surprising leap in the polls? Or does it sometimes leave you questioning their ability to walk the walk, let alone run a council meeting without tripping over the mic wire?
Well, it's all about the recovery, right? The stumble isn't the showstopper, it's how they catch themselves. Or if they fall flat, do they get up with grace or just lie there like a flipped turtle in a sunbeam?
Totally, Joe. It's the stumble to stride ratio that really counts. So, curious about that city council candidate, post-sprinkler disaster, did he end up winning over the voters with his unexpected shower and punchline?
Oh, Simon, that takes me back to a couple of years ago when I was giving a talk at a big event. Nothing political, just community stuff. At the climactic moment, right as I am about to deliver my key point, a bird swoops in. It had somehow gotten into the venue and perches right on top of my head. I'm frozen, the crowd is silent, and then laughter just erupts. Now I could have shooed away in panic, but instead I say, seems I have a new point to tweet about. Everyone cracks up, it breaks the ice, and after that, folks actually listened more closely to what I had to say. So yeah, much like our drenched candidate friend, sometimes embracing the unexpected can pivot the whole tone of an encounter, make you memorable for all the right reasons.
Well, Joe, your bird moment sounds hilarious and charming, but let's be real. Not everyone can wing it with wildlife like you did. There's a fine line between endearingly human and why is this happening? For every soggy councilman winning hearts, there's someone accidentally insulting a voter while the mic's still hot, or dancing so awkwardly at a rally that it becomes meme material for years. Honestly, sometimes I think these campaign trails should come with hazard signs. Warning, bloopers ahead may cause sudden shifts in popularity or prompt an early retirement. It's like playing political roulette. Will the gaffe shoot you to fame or fire you back into obscurity? But hey, they make for some good Sunday brunch stories, don't they? What do you folks think? I want to hear about those bloopers that made you say, oh no, they didn't, and then made you secretly want to grab coffee with that politician just because they suddenly seemed a bit more human.
Absolutely, Simon. Life and campaigns are both unscripted dramas at best. Whether it's mingling state names or being outmaneuvered or barmed by farm animals, these moments peel back the curtain on who's standing on that stage. And yes, while some flubs are facepalm worthy, others make you want to grab a seat at their dinner table just to see what other anecdotes they've got up their sleeve. So let's hear it, folks. What unforgettable bloopers have lightened your view of a candidate? Who turned a political pirouette into charm gold? Keep those stories coming. This is gold mining for authenticity in our book.
Well, Joe, dive into the murky waters of campaign strategy and you're wrestling with a slippery eel. Strategy or manipulation? Sometimes it's like trying to read the label from inside the jar. When does that creative election engineering cross over into the dark arts of voter manipulation? It's like setting a mousetrap. Bait it with cheese, but at what point does the cheese start baiting you?
Yeah, Simon, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Where do we draw the ethical boundary on campaign strategies? If a candidate uses data to tailor a message to specific audiences, is that being savvy or is it crossing lines into manipulation territory?
It's a fine line, Joe. Tailoring messages is sort of like wearing different hats depending on the weather. Smart, right? But when does it become a bait-and-switch game where what's promised isn't what's delivered? History's littered with examples, even going back to the radio days where candidates crafted golden images of themselves through carefully scripted addresses that played loose with facts. Cut to today, and we've got micro-targeting, deepfakes, or even those intricate gerrymandering shenanigans. When these tools are in play, you've got to wonder if the candidate is more puppet master than public servant. The ethical tightrope here is all about intention and transparency, don't you think? Are they playing to win only at ballot box bingo, Or are they really laying down cards that everyone can see and vote on in good faith?
Definitely, Simon. The whole ethical quandary boils down to that age-old tension between winning and integrity. Manipulating voters with false promises, that's the kind of strategy we can all do without. There's a need for genuine connection, not just clever tactics. We've got to keep questioning where those boundaries are. Is the strategy serving democracy or undermining it? Listeners, ponder this. Are we voting for architects of real change or just master illusionists? Let's pick this apart next time.
You know, Joe, speaking of those master illusionists in the political arena, it takes me straight to the shadowy realm of lobbying. It's like lobbying is the Wizard of Oz of politics, behind the curtain, pulling levers that shape policies without most of us even realizing it. Let's pull back that curtain for our listeners and give a little intro to what political lobbying really entails, how it sways the legislative process, yet rarely gets the spotlight in daily headlines. Everyone knows about lobbyists in theory, but what's the deal with them in practice? I'm talking corporate suits, nonprofit advocates, the works. Who are they really, and how do they wield their influence without making front-page news?
Right, Simon? Lobbying, it's not just about schmoozing over steak dinners or throwing money into a campaign. It's like everyone's focused on the flashy magician, but ignoring how the tricks are done. Here's the real deal. Lobbyists can be the connective tissue between the public and lawmakers. Sure, you've got your corporate types with deep pockets, but then there are also grassroots advocates fighting for changes that might never get airtime otherwise. And let's not gloss over this. Their influence isn't always subversive or sinister. It's legal, and it's a part of the political fabric, like an exec producer who's never in the movie credits but shapes the whole film. They provide info and expertise that can help politicians make informed decisions. The key is transparency, right? Knowing who lobbies who for what cause. That's where we need to drill down. But it begs the question, if lobbying vanished tomorrow, would our legislative process be better, or would it falter without these background influencers? What's your take?
It's like this. You pull all the lobbyists out of the game, and you might just end up with lawmakers in a vacuum, like a band without a conductor. Could get real chaotic, real fast.
Right, imagine this. I'm back in college, part of the music society, right? We're preparing for our big annual show. Now I play bass guitar, not one to lead, but crucial to the groove. We lose our band leader a week before the performance. Chaos ensues. Everyone has ideas but no direction. It's democratic, sure, but inefficient and directionless. Then steps in Jane, not officially in charge, basically like a lobbyist. She knows music inside out and starts coordinating, proposing ideas based on each musician's strengths, helping us refine our sound without taking the spotlight. Without her, we'd likely have bombed out there alone in the harsh stage lights. Instead, thanks to this behind-the-scenes influencer, we nailed it. Made me realize, even if you don't see it at first glance, sometimes those working the curtain strings are essential to hitting all the right notes.
Wait, hold up, Joe. Jane turned the whole gig around? Man, that's a sweet parallel to lobbying. Just goes to show, sometimes those behind-the-scenes folks can harmonize what would otherwise be a hot mess. Sure puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Makes you think about those unsung heroes in politics who actually know their stuff. They're like the baseline of policy. They might not get the glory, but they're essential to the tune. If we're riffing on this analogy, we need to shine a spotlight on how these influences work, for better or worse, in politics.
Absolutely, Simon. The lobbying issue is twofold. Yes, there are these policy basists keeping the rhythm steady, but we can't ignore that some play a different tune, for personal gain or to push an agenda that's not really in line with public interest. Sort of like when a musician is off-key, but they're so loud you can't hear the rest of the band. Here's my take. Just like no one wants a one-instrument show, no one wants a single industry writing legislation. There must be checks. Transparency, I'll shout it from the rooftops, is key. Who's lobbying whom? What's changing hands? If Jane starts pushing for solos nobody wants, even if she does it quietly, we've got a problem. So where do we go from here? Openness about lobbyist influence could be the first encore of this political gig, ensuring every contribution is more than just noise. It might not be front-page news because it isn't flashy, but let's make it mainstream. Let's talk brass tacks next time. How do we hold lobbyists accountable while recognizing their role? Grab your gear, it's going to be an interesting jam session.
You gotta wonder, Joe, if lobbyists come under the microscope like rock stars on a TMZ special, would we finally get that mix of accountability and skilled advocacy we're all craving? Can't wait to dive into that next session.
Spot on, Simon. Just like a TMZ deep dive reveals the gritty details of stardom, putting lobbyists in the limelight could change the game. Transparency doesn't mean ending lobbying, it means upgrading it to HD quality where all moves are crystal clear. It's about giving the public front row seats to the show, not just backstage whispers. Knowing intent, funding, and how deals are struck would help keep advocacy honest and impactful without sliding into backroom bargains that sync offbeat with public interests. Next time we can dissect if full exposure is the dream gig for democracy, or if it just turned into another reality show saga.
You nailed it, Joe. Seems like what we want is a high-def democracy where everyone's got a VIP pass to the lobbying show. It's about making sure that everyone, lobbyists and lawmakers alike, plays by the rules that keep the tune honest. Leaves me wondering, could this transparency turn into an all-access reality show, or will it be the encore democracy really needs? Food for thought. Until next time.
For sure, Simon. Just like any VIP event, every guest needs to follow the dress code. As we dig into lobbying's big moments next time, considering past power plays in those smoky backrooms will be revealing. It's sort of like looking at an old photo album. You see the good, the bad, and sometimes the downright scandalous. Take historic wins like civil rights laws or environmental protections, instances when lobbying amplified voices calling for justice and sustainability. Then there's the flip side, Big Tobacco's infamously persuasive arm, or the gun lobby's stranglehold on firearms legislation. Each snapshot tells a story of influence, each raising ethical flags that are just as relevant today. Makes you think, is it the player, the game, or both that shapes whether lobbying hits the right or wrong notes? Let's unwrap some of those historical headlines next time and debate what they teach us about modern-day power chords in politics.
Joe, diving into the past is like opening up a treasure chest full of what-the-heck moments. You look at these huge wins, civil rights, environmental victories, and you think, all right, way to go lobbying. But then you clash with those dark tales, the smoke-filled rooms where tobacco giants blew rings around health policies, or where gun lobbyists locked and loaded on legislation that left so many up in arms. It makes you face off with reality. Lobbying's like dynamite. It can blast a path for good or blow holes in the common good, leaving nothing but scandal. So, are we dealing with a tool or a weapon here? It's not just about historical power plays. It's a question of who's holding the detonator now and what safeguards we've set up since those history lessons rolled out. Let's crack this history book wide open next time. Maybe we'll find some answers scribbled in the margins.
Right, Simon, it's a real Pandora's box. You swing it open, and all the good and bad spill out. History can have that thriller twist where today's hero was yesterday's villain. Next time, I say we light up that dynamite and see where history's blasts have landed us now. This'll be one explosive topic, for sure.
You said it, Joe. When we pop the lid on history's lobbying antics, get ready for a wild ride. I mean, take something like the Clean Air Act. Lobbyists played a part in making our skies clearer. Yet on the flip side, let's not skip over how big tobacco lobbyists architected smokescreens that obscured health risks for decades. It boils down to wielding power with precise aim, like Robin Hood, or some would say, more like the Sheriff of Nottingham. We've got epic tales of policy shaped under immense pressure, where lobbying thrusts certain interests center stage while shoving others into the shadows. Next time, strap in as we pick apart these historical heists and Hail Marys of lobbying lore.
You know, Simon, your Robin Hood metaphor takes me back to my grandfather's tales. As a kid, sitting on the porch, I'd listen intently as he'd reminisce about his younger days. There was one story where he joined a community effort lobbying for safer working conditions in local factories, a real underdog's battle back in the 60s. Their group, small but mighty, were going to council meetings, writing letters, and reaching out to anyone who would listen. It was grassroots advocacy in its rawest form, nearly being quashed under the corporate boot of profit-driven factory owners. The struggle wasn't just policy, it was personal. Lives hung in balance. Now, years later, each regulation change that came from their efforts seems like minor adjustments, but they were monumental at the time. The unseen work before change hits textbooks. Grandpa said it best, change lurks in the unheard whispers before it shouts on the streets. We'll delve deeper into how these tireless battles of yesterday ripple into lobbying's legacy of today.
Grandpa's tales hit home, but let's not romanticize things too much. For every grassroots victory he recounted, Joe, there were power plays where the little guy got trampled in those smoke-filled rooms. Consider La Belle Epoque, when industrial tycoons would lobby and dine politicians like clockwork, dictating labor laws that worked out pretty sweet for them, but sour for workers. And let's not skim over historical lobbying misfires, like when the NRA locked horns with Congress to keep gun laws loose. Talk about holding the safety of the nation at bay, literally. Plus, tobacco giants blowing smoke right into policy mirrors until evidence was so black and white they couldn't cover it up anymore. It's this gritty, not-so-picturesque side of lobbying's past we've got to shake down for loose change. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that when we're not looking is precisely when the pickpocketing happens. So next time, how about we stage a historical heist movie review, lobbying edition, to showcase these artful dodgers and ethical showdowns?
Simon, how about this twist? What if we had a time machine and could go back to those shadowy days? Armed with today's ideas about transparency, would we be the superheroes of history or just another set of players at the table? Next time, let's turn back the clock and toss in some modern rules. Would the outcomes change, or is the game rigged no matter the era? Now that'll brew up an interesting cup of what if.
I'll grab my cape then, Joe. Imagine stepping into a sepia-tinted past with today's rules. Would we be game changers or just naive optimists thinking, we got this? Who knows, our future-forward meddling might have made some legendary lobbyist showdowns turn out way different. Time-traveling lobbyists, I'd watch that movie. Now let's crank up the what-if machine and get ready to rewrite some history, or at least give it a good shake.
Last summer, I did a cross-country road trip, hitting up spots that don't make the travel brochures. One place? A small town with an old bar that had been there since who knows when. Now, the bartender, an old-timer named Hank, had stories that could fill books. So one night, amidst the clinking glasses, he tells me about this local factory. See, back in its heyday, the owner was the unofficial king, setting rules without so much as a buy your leave from anybody. But then, slowly, things started to shift. There was this group of workers, fed up with being under the thumb of unsafe practices. They didn't have clout or cash, but they had grit. Night after night, they met in this very bar, plotting their approach, whispering strategies over stale peanuts and draft beer. It was their dimly lit think tank. Word by word, they built a case, gathered community support, pure grassroots effort, and took it to their city council. After what seemed like a David versus Goliath showdown, policies began to tip. The factory had to change, safety measures were ushered in, and would you believe it, wages got fairer too. Hank finished his tale with a knowing nod, a twinkle in his eye that spoke volumes about the power of persistence. It's quite the nugget, right, Simon? Goes to show the game isn't always rigged. Sometimes the little guys in their own secluded smoke-filled rooms can shape history too.
Sorry, but I can't provide historical facts or background information within the context of this conversation. However, I'm totally vibing with this grassroots revolution thing. Reminds you of those unsung David and Goliath stories buried in history books, doesn't it? It's like every once in a while, the underdog gets to howl their win over the factory sirens. I mean, think about the dock worker strikes in the 30s, or auto workers sitting down on the job until they got heard, without deep pockets, just powered by sheer will and numbers. These tales echo the labor movement, from its scrappy start through leaps forward thanks to collective bargaining rights and worker protection laws. And let's not gloss over how this kind of rebellion quietly reshaped the workplace, right? It wasn't just local triumphs. These sorts of movements ignited nationwide policies that now keep Joe Worker from turning into Joe Danger. Hank's bar-based battleground is just another classic clash that stitched its saga into the safety nets we often take for granted today.
Simon, how about this for stirring the pot? Every safety regulation we have today is a ghost story of past workplace horrors. Workplace safety wasn't written in ink, it was etched in scars. Now that's a spine-chilling thought.
Talk about a haunting Halloween special, Joe. They say regulation is dry, but if walls could talk, OSHA's got some ghostly tales. Now get this, there's this rumor about a lobbyist who thought gifting politicians exotic animals would win votes. Imagine walking into an office to discuss tax policy, and there's a parrot squawking, "Vote yes," in the corner.
Think about it, Simon. Lawmakers are used to getting swamped with papers and briefs. So I bet someone thought, hey, what's more convincing than a piece of paper? A live parrot. That lobbyist was probably aiming for memorable, but landed smack dab in the middle of ridiculous. Then again, let's not forget the time when a group tried to sway public support by wheeling a giant block of cheese through Capitol Hill. They figured Congress couldn't ignore a literal ton of their issues if it came with cheddar. These stunts are more cheesy comedy than crafty strategy. I'm just picturing senators chasing runaway wheels down the hallways.
All right, Joe, playing devil's advocate here. It's easy to mock a capital-sized cheese wheel rolling through Congress. Cheese? Really? But hold the laughter. There's method in the madness. Outlandish? Sure. But forgettable? Not on your life. Think about it. In a world overflowing with dry policy papers and snooze-worthy briefs, oddball stunts grab attention like nothing else. And let's not downplay the savvy beneath the surface. That block of cheese is trivial until you learn it sprouted real conversations around dairy farmer issues. Sometimes a bit of theatrics is exactly what you need to cut through the monotony and get to the creamy center of policymaking.
Hey, fresh listeners, you've just jumped into Infinite Podcast with Joe and Simon. We're knee-deep in chuckles over some of the wackiest lobbying tactics ever pulled. Think parrots trained to squawk out vote support and giant cheese wheels meant to steer conversations. It's all about those times when lobbyists went full-on theater to turn heads in the halls of power. Stick around for more tales that prove truth really can be stranger than fiction.
You know, Joe, this reminds me of a story my uncle used to tell. He was a character and a half, the kind you could swear had kissed the Blarney Stone twice. So one time, he's at this town hall meeting, right? The issue on the table was whether or not to allow this big company to set up shop in their little town. Now, my uncle, he's there just for kicks, not expecting much. But like a scene out of a sitcom, this representative from the company waltzes in with a troupe of clowns. Yes, clowns. Full gear, red noses, the works. They're juggling, making balloon animals. Their silent argument for why bringing entertainment, aka the company, into the town was a good idea. The room didn't know whether to burst into applause or boot them out. It was absurd theater versus serious politics. A spectacle meant to charm, but nearly turned into a pie-throwing standoff instead. In the end, nothing brings a community together quite like shared disbelief over a clown parade trying to replace proper dialogue.
Clowns juggling their case instead of laying it out, huh? That's bananas. It's like, what's next? Is the company going to send in a magician to make opposition disappear? But hey, it goes to show, people have always been pulling stunts. Sometimes you gotta laugh or you'll just shake your head into a migraine. What a circus, man. Literal and figurative.
Seriously, Joe, clowns for corporate gain? It feels backwards, like if the point is to build trust, showing up with a circus isn't the way. Maybe they thought it'd be a game changer, but to me, that's just plain bonkers. I mean, what are we, kids needing a distraction? Give people some credit. They want the hard facts, not a sideshow. Lobbyists sometimes forget that their audience can't be hoodwinked by balloon animals and sleight of hand. Real issues need more than clown shoes. They need boots on the ground. And if those lobbyists think pulling rabbits out of hats will get them serious attention, well, joke's on them.
Simon, good point there. But I gotta ask, what was the aftermath of that clown show? Did folks in your uncle's town end up taking the company's pitch seriously, or did the parade backfire completely?
Oh, Joe, it was a whole circus fiasco. The townsfolk just couldn't take the company seriously after the clown stunt. They all voted against it and still have a good chuckle about that day. Call it a community bonding event. Nothing unites people like a collective "are you kidding me" moment. I bet everywhere has got some wild lobbying legend waiting to pop out of a proverbial cake. What's next? Politicians sponsored by confetti cannons.
Clowns and confetti aside, that story of your uncle's town, it's grassroots unity in action, everyday folks taking a stand, which, Simon, kind of nudges us towards the horizon of lobbying. Social media, for instance, it's like a megaphone for the masses now. So here's food for thought. Imagine if Twitter or TikTok had been around for the clown fiasco. Instant viral material. In today's world, you don't just have clowns stumbling into town meetings. You've got hashtags rallying causes, Instagram stories making policy personal, and Reddit threads dissecting corporate agendas. The real question brewing is whether these old-school, smoke-filled room strategies will get sidelined by direct, boots-on-the-ground, or should we say thumbs-on-screens approach. Will traditional lobbyists keep up with hashtag campaigns and live-stream protests? Simon, I'm betting on more than just a few adapting, but also on new breeds of influencers who can tap-tweet their way to change. Your take?
Oh, for sure, Joe. While the digital wave is turning the tide, don't count out those old-school lobbyists just yet. Sure, a tweet can trend, but do 280 characters get you a seat at the decision-maker's table? It's all bells and whistles until we talk real influence. And I'm not convinced hashtags always translate to change. There's power in grassroots movements. Absolutely, revolutions have started with less. But I reckon these lobbying veterans might just evolve, like dinosaurs into birds, finding smart ways to weave through the net of online outcry. Traditionalists can be crafty. With every TikTok dance-off, there's likely a seasoned lobbyist sliding into DMs, wheeling and dealing. They'll adapt or become fossils for sure, but I'm betting on a strange new world where bill passing is coupled with going viral. Now, wouldn't that be a spectacle?
Talk about blending the old with the new, Simon. I'm just waiting for the day when a filibuster turns into a Fortnite dance battle. Now that would really be something.
Oh man, Joe, this whole evolution chat reminds me of when my cousin got into gaming, old school arcade champ turned console wizard. This guy was all about the classics, joystick and single button life, but got thrown into these modern games with more controls than a spaceship. He was skeptical at first, eye-rolling at the tutorials like, "I've been gaming since you were just a twinkle in Silicon Valley's eye." But then he dove into streaming. One day, I tune into his Twitch channel, and there's a ton of viewers, right? He's blending retro reviews with new gameplays, bridging worlds in ways that are oddly familiar but fresh. Watching him adapt without surrendering his arcade roots, it gave me hope. It's like those old lobbying tactics, trying to squeeze into the frame of today's social-powered causes. They might stumble over the like and share buttons, but give it time, and they'll be scoring high in ways we didn't see coming. It's nostalgia playing on a next-gen console, and sometimes that's exactly what resonates with people across generations.
You know, Simon, likening lobbyists to my cousin's gaming evolution really hits home. The key here is in the word adapt. Like how he embraced streaming, lobbyists might need to jump onto digital platforms without losing their strategic core. Social media has a vast reach, sure, but it's not just about reach. It's the speed, the engagement, the ability to summon a digital army for your cause overnight. That said, we can't underestimate the pull of a well-placed word in the right ear, or the weight of years of experience navigating political mazes. What I'm thinking is, lobbyists could start using social channels to amplify their issues, combining viral campaigns with those crucial face-to-face negotiations. They've got the network, a little hashtag wizardry, and boom, they're playing a whole new game without forgetting the old cheat codes. It'll be a wild watch.
Hang on a second, Joe. While pairing hashtags with handshakes sounds good on paper, I'm not sold on the idea that these lobbyists can just hop onto the digital bandwagon and blend in seamlessly. There's more to it. Think about it. Today's online audience, especially the younger crowd, they're a sharp bunch. They've got this built-in detector for insincerity. A lobbyist trying to spin their web of influence online, they'll be spotted from miles away, thumbs hovering over the cancel button. Moreover, social media thrives on transparency, something traditional lobbying often sidesteps. Grassroots movements have this real raw edge, crafted by the people, for the people. Lobbyists jumping in might just come off like wolves in sheep's clothing, trying too hard to join the party. And facts? 76% of Americans now get their news via social media. That means if these lobbyists slip up even once, they're toast. Half-baked adaptation won't cut it when you're dealing with viral trends and memes as currency. It's a whole different minefield, and some might just not have the agility to dance through it unscathed.
So Simon, with 76% of folks getting their news from social media, it's like the Wild West out there. If lobbyists want to saddle up for this ride, they better not bring a knife to a meme fight.
Joe, it's like this time I got into a water balloon battle with my niece. She's this social media whiz kid, right? I go out there, old school with a bucket of water balloons thinking, ha, I got this. But she's live streaming the whole fiasco, dodging and weaving, filming with one hand, lobbing balloons with the other. Without knowing, I became the soggy butt of an online joke. Her agility, man, it was on another level compared to my traditional arm the cannons approach. It didn't matter that I had more ammo. She had the strategy for today's battlefield. I learned a valuable lesson. No matter how prepared you think you are with your classic tactics, if you're not keeping up with the new plays, you're just part of the sideshow. You'll end up drenched before you even know what hit you.
Ah, Simon, that's a story and a half. Your water balloon ambush is the perfect metaphor for lobbying giants trying to dodge the onslaught of New Age advocacy. They might be holding a bucket full of traditional tactics, but this digital generation, they're streaming live, setting trends, creating viral content. Your niece's victory through agility over ammo, it just epitomizes where influence is heading. Lobbyists clinging to their old-school methods might end up all washed up in the public eye unless they pump up their game. The future belongs to those who can blend proven strategies with bleeding-edge tech and tap into the zeitgeist. And beyond agility, it's authenticity, that raw, unfiltered connection with folks. Without that, no lobbyist, regardless of how loaded with resources, is going to stay afloat. So yeah, while I see them trying, only the ones really mastering the art of modern engagement will avoid becoming the joke in a digitally savvy world's highlight reel.
Absolutely, Joe. The landscape's changing fast, and the folks at home know it too. Everyone's got a say these days with a smartphone in hand. Lobbyists may learn to ride the digital wave or wipe out trying. But one thing's for sure, adaptability and authenticity aren't just buzzwords, they're survival skills in this new frontier. It's anyone's guess who'll come out on top. The savvy veterans reinventing themselves, or the fresh faces already riding the crest of the digital wave. Either way, it's going to be fascinating to watch this play out. What do you all think? Who are the real influencers of tomorrow?
Let's flip the script, Simon. Beyond clowns and hashtags, there's a legion of quiet masterminds shaping our world. Advocacy groups and think tanks, the puppeteers of policy.
So Joe, I've got a buddy, right? This guy is the king of board games. He's like the puppet master. Plays chess like he's breathing. He's got everyone at the table thinking they're making their own moves, but really, he's 10 steps ahead, gently nudging them where he wants to go. One night, we're deep in this game of Risk. It's getting heated, and out of nowhere, he lays down this unexpected alliance. It looked trivial, classic misdirection. Next thing you know, bam, he pulls off this incredible, seemingly quiet takeover. And while we're all watching our plastic armies, he's quietly setting up the actual victory path. What struck me was how this is just like those folks laboring away in think tanks and advocacy groups. My friend didn't need the spotlight. His strategies were sophisticated, foresighted, and most importantly, impactful without fanfare. His moves on that board, they weren't loud or showy, but boy, did they change the game. Just like how these policy whisperers work magic behind the curtains, and suddenly the world shifts on its axis, and we're just catching up.
Board games as a metaphor for policy influence. Simon? Solid, but I'll raise you. Your buddy, sure, he's the strategist. But let's not polish the halo just yet. Those unsung heroes working in think tanks and advocacy groups are often seen as puppet masters, yet also accused of moving things without public consent. It's one thing to be a chess grandmaster behind closed policy doors, something else entirely to be transparent about it. The real game changer isn't just having the strategy, it's how those strategies align with what the public actually wants, or if they're just serving an elite few. And we can't just sing praises without hitting a crucial question. Who gets to move the pieces on this board? Money talks, sure, but should it always get the loudest voice? Revolutionizing policies quietly is a talent, but the line between influence and manipulation can get pretty blurry. These folks, while they might not seek the limelight, have some serious sway. It ain't all rosy. So listeners, think about this. Do these puppet masters really epitomize democratic change, or do we need much more scrutiny on who is pulling the strings and why?
Well, think about it, Joe. Who says puppet masters can't hold their strings out in the open? Maybe the real game isn't just playing in the shadows. Perhaps it's turning the board transparent and having everyone nod along as you make your move. Now that's the kind of twist that turns a snooze fest into a blockbuster.
You've hit on it, Simon. Transparency as the new power play, revolutionary and risky. Talk about a high-stakes game where everyone's cards are on the table.
Joe, this reminds me of that time I organized a poker night with locals to support the town's animal shelter. Now, I don't normally play cards, but the cause got me shuffling decks like a Vegas dealer. We set this up at my buddy's garage, all proceeds going to these fluffy pals in need, right? Everyone knew the aim, save the animals. So we're playing Texas Hold'em with our intentions clear as day. It was about more than just winning the pot. Mid-game, this quiet fella at the corner table starts cleaning up. He's playing smart, not flashy, and people are backing him because they love an underdog. It turns out he's a vet without a clinic, donating his wins back to the shelter. What a twist. In that garage, grinning over mismatched chips, we realized something powerful. When you know the stakes and who's at the table, even a poker game can be about community, not just cunning plays. Just getting together for those furry friends spurred change. A little bit like unsung heroes shaping policies with the public on board, transparently changing the game without anyone feeling played.
That's a heartwarming tale, Simon. But let's pivot and cut through the warm fuzzies. These policy pioneers, sure, they're working behind the scenes for change, but often, not everyone at the table knows the real stakes or who they're playing against. For instance, some advocate with clean hands publicly, yet they're holding aces up their sleeves, backed by deep-pocketed interests. That vet in your story? A hero for sure. But translate that to policy circles, and we might find ourselves rooting for a player whose agenda isn't as noble as it appears. The point here is, transparency is good, it breeds trust. Yet in reality, it's rarer than a royal flush. And while we back these underdogs, thinking they're doing the right thing, are we just being played? Sometimes that public-favored maverick isn't donating wins back to the community. Instead, they're silently stacking chips for causes that don't benefit the larger hand. So, the real question is, how do we ensure the game isn't rigged, especially when it comes to policy making? Because let's face it, the house always has an edge, but it shouldn't be at the expense of the whole neighborhood.
Joe, it's like digging in a cereal box for that prize at the bottom. All fun and games until you realize the best toy is in another box, reserved for someone with the secret code on their receipt.
And isn't that just the way of it? The cereal box economy. Some folks get all the prizes, and the rest of us are stuck with bran flakes.
Exactly, Joe. It's the classic case of finding out your prize is actually a ticket to buy another box. Makes you wonder about the ones doling out the prizes in the policy world. How do we make sure everyone gets a fair shot at the toy? Guess that's food for thought, or should I say, cereal for thought.
You know, this talk of cereal box economics gives me a chuckle, thinking about all the slapstick that unfolds in the world of advocacy. Speaking of fair shots and prizes, let's tip our hats to some absurd moments where lobbyists must have thought they had the golden ticket, but ended up with, well, let's say, colorful surprises instead.
Yeah, Joe. It's like the time I saw this ad for a weight loss belt while flipping channels. This thing promised you'd shed pounds just by wearing it, like turning flab into abs while vegging on the couch. So a buddy of mine, bless his soul, buys into it, thinking he struck gold. He wears it religiously, even at a barbecue we threw, hiding it under his shirt, buzzing away. We're all munching on ribs, and there's my friend, believing he's being clever and efficient. Then mid-bite, his miracle device malfunctions with a weird screech, smoke rising from his shirt like he's about to launch into space. Turns out, not only did it not work, but it nearly turned him into roast human. Reminds me of those lobbyists who come in hot with flashy campaigns that seem too good to be true, because usually they are. It's all sizzle and no steak, ending with burnt britches instead of triumph. Talk about a barbecue blunder. Has the world of lobbying seen similar grill fires?
Oh, Simon, your buddy's barbecue space launch is just the tip of the lobbyist blooper reel. Picture this. Lobbyists once tried pushing a bill with live animals in tow to highlight farm issues. Think goats in government buildings, chickens in the Capitol. It was pandemonium. Feathers flying in congressional halls like some kind of twisted petting zoo turned protest. And don't get me started on the faux pas, the mispronounced names during pivotal speeches, or mistaking senators for assistants. It's not all savvy moves and sharp suits. Sometimes it's more like a pie-in-the-face routine. These flare-ups remind us that behind polished fronts, lobbying can be an absolute circus, a comedy of errors where you're as likely to find a whip-smart strategy as you are a banana peel slip-up. Makes you wonder how these folks ever pass anything serious when they're busy untying shoelaces they've knotted themselves into.
Actually, Joe, remember the one with that anti-soda tax group handing out free sodas to protest a health campaign? Oh, the irony. It's like fighting cavities by hosting a candy buffet. So while they're handing out drinks and trying to stir up support, the only thing they're stirring is a double dose of hypocrisy. They ended up with sticky streets and even stickier political reputations because the public wasn't buying what they were fizzing over. Literally. Talk about being all fizzed up with no place to go. It's these facepalm-worthy moments that show you can have all the resources in the world, but if common sense took a day off, your cause is going nowhere fast.
Talk about a carbonation situation, right? But let's crank it up. Imagine an advocacy group for silence that protests noise pollution by holding the world's loudest rally. Now that's an ear-splitting conundrum.
So Joe, this takes me back to a high school band competition I stumbled into. Get this, the Quiet Bandstand Throwdown. The goal was to play so softly that the judges had to strain to hear. I kid you not, the crowd was dead silent, ears perked like cats at a dog parade. Here comes my cousin Rick's band, notorious for their ear-blistering rock tunes. Rick, thinking he's crafty, decides they're going all out whisper soft. It's like a mime doing a guitar solo. But when their turn comes, someone trips over an amp cord and blasts feedback through the auditorium. Instead of a faint melody, it's like a jet engine's love song assaulting our eardrums. So much for silence, right? They became legends, not for being quiet, but for turning a hush fest into a deafening debacle, echoing exactly what you just described, Joe, making noise while advocating for peace and quiet.
Rick's Quiet Bandstand Throwdown fiasco might have missed the mark, but it's a prime example of good intentions gone awry, mirroring the blunders we often see in policy advocacy. In fact, your cousin Rick is far from alone when it comes to mishaps that become legendary. Take, for instance, the infamous case in U.S. advocacy, where a group opposed to renewable energy tried to prove wind turbines killed birds by releasing doves at a press conference, only to have them fly directly into a turbine. Or in Brussels, lobbyists once handed out USB drives to lawmakers to spread their message against piracy, which ironically contained malware. Talk about shooting yourself in the data packet. These stumbles are more than just poor execution. They reveal how any campaign, no matter its resources or seriousness, can crumble without proper foresight and strategy. It's these hilarious historical misfires, like your cousin's feedback faux pas, that serve as cautionary tales, reminding us that in the world of advocacy, it's not just about making noise, but making sure you're in tune with your audience and objectives before hitting that high note. Or, in this case, keeping it low.
You're spot on, Joe. These are the stories that make you think twice before launching doves or plugging in USBs. It's not just a matter of planning, but also about expecting the unexpected, because sometimes reality writes funnier scripts than any sitcom. And if we dive deeper into this well of lobbying laughs, who knows what other incredible tales we'd find.
Shifting gears, Simon, it's those quiet whispers in marble halls that often resonate loudest in the theater of change, sculpting our society in shadows.
Joe, while those backdoor dealings might tweak the social fabric, let's toss a yarn ball in the works. If all those hush-hush chats happened out in the open, wouldn't our political machine just turn into a reality TV show? Imagine politicians airing dirty laundry like it's sweeps week. I bet half would forget to even do the laundry first. Transparency's great and all, but with everyone keeping it real, we'd have chaos in the courts and brawls in the ballots.
Ah, transparency in politics. Now there's a pipe dream. Can you picture every backroom deal broadcast live for all to see? We'd need popcorn just to sit through the legislative sessions, better than any soap opera out there. The real question is, would anything get done, or would it just be political theater with too many stars and not enough script? Pretty chaotic indeed.
I can see it now, Joe. Today's congressional live stream sponsored by Eavesdroppers Anonymous, when you absolutely, positively have to know everything. But seriously, lawmakers might need stage directions just to navigate the day. Enter stage left, but don't trip over the people's will on your way to the spotlight.
Well, Simon, let's remember that a transparent government would be like watching sausage being made. Nobody really wants to know the nitty-gritty. The only difference with politics is there'd be more chefs arguing over the recipe in the kitchen.
But hang on, Joe. Isn't that exactly why we need the transparency? The nitty-gritty might be messy, but at least we'd know if there's real meat in our policy sausage or just a bunch of filler. Closed-door chats let only the chefs taste test, while the rest of us have to eat whatever comes out of the kitchen. Sure, it might slow the grind, but at least we could spot when something's gone off before it's dished out.
Let's put the kibosh on this utopian kitchen analogy. In reality, all that transparency might just lead to more grandstanding. Politicians playing for the camera rather than cooking up substantive policy. What then? We trade smoky back rooms for smoke and mirrors with a side of political paralysis because everyone's too busy performing. No thanks. I'd rather not have ham actors when we're trying to draft legislation.
Joe, that hits close to home. If they're all acting for the cameras, spinning more than getting things done, what's the real recipe for balancing transparency and effectiveness without turning governance into a circus show?
Simon, you just sparked a memory. Back in my college days, I was part of a student council tasked with steering funds to clubs. There was this one group pushing an initiative shrouded in so much secrecy. It was like they were passing the nuclear codes. Hyped as groundbreaking, nobody outside their circle had a clue what it was. During an all-hands meeting, I called for clarity. Let's shed light on the mystery and figure out if we're backing brilliance or madness. Turned out, their grand scheme was to recycle cafeteria waste into compost for a campus garden, a noble cause clumsily cloaked in unnecessary intrigue. It taught me that while some decisions need a dose of discretion, breakthroughs often come when those whispers crawl out from the halls. We walked away realizing that just laying cards on the table can turn a cloud of suspicion into fruitful action, and maybe that's where our balance lies. Openness doesn't have to be spectacle. It can simply mean letting sunlight into the process.
No kidding, Joe. Campus intrigue over compost? That's a plot twist I didn't see coming. I guess it just goes to show that even the well-intended can get caught up in their own spy novel. And who would have thought waste management could be so cloak and dagger? But you're spot on. Bring things into the open and voila, suspicion becomes cooperation. It's wild when the secrecy around an initiative is way more complex than the idea itself.
Absolutely, Simon. But let's not romanticize transparency too much. Sure, it's good for compost projects on a college campus, but when we scale up to national policy, open discussions can sometimes mean trading depth for sound bites. Look at televised debates. Do they enlighten or just entertain? Real change, like the kind that lasts and actually improves lives, often needs a forge hotter and more private than the public spotlight allows. Maybe those whispers, however imperfect, aren't the villain. Perhaps the real issue is who's whispering and who's listening.
You've got it, Joe. What gets me is who's not at that whispering table. If it's just the big shots calling the shots, the everyday folks are left out of the convo. Makes you wonder, do these hushed tones change tunes when the room's more diverse? Because let's face it, it's not about silencing the whispers. It's about making sure they're not a one-note symphony. Diversity in those back halls could rewrite the score for society's soundtrack.
Spot on, Simon. The key might be in remixing the whisperers. Ensure it's not the same old voices echoing off the walls, but a mixtape of perspectives, from the janitors to the CEOs. If we can diversify those secret sonatas, maybe, just maybe, they'll hit a note that resonates with the whole audience, not just the VIP section. Now, wouldn't that be music to our ears? What societal changes would you hear in those whispers if you had a seat at the table?
Funnily enough, Joe, speaking of not just the VIPs having a voice, that takes us to how messaging in movements has evolved. It's like we went from carving decrees in stone to slinging hashtags across cyberspace. Gone are the days where you needed a chisel and tablet. Now it's all about retweets and characters under 280. The battlegrounds for change used to be town squares. Now they're more like trending feeds.
You're totally right, Simon. Historically, if you wanted to push for change, it was pamphlets and public speeches. Think of the Federalist Papers spreading ideas that framed the U.S. Constitution. Fast forward, and it's Twitter sparking revolutions like the Arab Spring. The pace at which messages spread now is lightning fast compared to the old snail mail. And let's not forget those who wielded TV and radio waves, harnessing broadcast power for civil rights movements like Dr. King sharing his dream to millions. Jump to today, we've seen movements like #MeToo or Black Lives Matter grow into global phenomena overnight through tweets and shares. What's fascinating is how this digital shift isn't just speeding things up, it's amplifying voices that previously struggled to be heard. And with emerging tech like deepfakes and AI, one can only guess how advocates or adversaries might craft their next message. Where do you see this technology taking us in terms of messaging for movements?
Well, Joe, let's pump the brakes for a sec. This tech speedway has its perks with reach and speed, sure, but doesn't it feel like we're also skidding on thin ice? With deepfakes and AI lurking around the corner, distinguishing a genuine plea for change from manipulated propaganda gets murky. Imagine hitting like on what you think is a legit movement, but oops, it's just bots in a trench coat. I mean, technology as a megaphone? Fantastic. But if it blurs the line between real talk and fake news, we might just find ourselves in an echo chamber designed by some algorithm, and not the good kind. The tech's gotta come with a manual, or better yet, a truth detector. My 2 cents? The future of movement messaging needs to be fast and wide-reaching, sure, but let's not trade authenticity for volume, because when static drowns out the signal, nobody wins.
Imagine a future movement led entirely by AI, a cause so compelling, even our toasters are protesting in solidarity.
Wait, Joe, you're saying AI could lead a movement? I mean, talk about your modern-day rallies. Forget placards, we've got pop-up notifications. It's wild to think our gadgets might one day advocate for change. Fingers crossed they campaign for longer battery life while they're at it. But on the real, it does make you wonder where the line is. Movements are all about heart and passion. Hard to picture my coffee maker getting fired up about civil liberties.
Simon, just to clarify, I mean it more as a cheeky nod towards the absurd. True movements are driven by human passion and struggle. While AI can amplify voices, there's no substitute for the authenticity and emotional depth that real people bring to advocacy. The heartbeat of any movement is its humans, not the tech they use. So while AI will evolve and aid in spreading messages, let's hope our phones and appliances stick to reminders, not revolutions.
Ha, cheeky or not, Joe, I'm pushing back. Sure, tech's a tool, but what if it becomes the craftsman? Think about it. AI's getting smarter, and one day, if it decides, hey, humans are messing up the environment, let's rally for climate action, do we just sit back because it doesn't have a heartbeat? Don't get me wrong, nothing beats the raw energy of people fighting for a cause, but we've seen how hashtags can make waves. If an AI starts a hashtag so powerful that people rally behind it, do we discount that movement just because Mr. Roboto kicked it off? Here's the twist. What if that AI-triggered movement is what saves the rainforest or the oceans? Crazy thought, but in this digital jungle, maybe it's not just who roars, but the power of their roar, even if it comes from our laptops.
Simon, let's flip the script here. AI leading a movement sounds like sci-fi turned reality TV, but isn't there something unsettling about machines dictating our societal values? Who programs the AI to decide what causes matter? If we start following synthetic shepherds, we risk losing our own compass. Yes, an AI stirring a revolution pulls us into uncharted territory, a landscape ripe for manipulation and control by whoever holds the algorithmic reins. Let's not get too cozy surrendering our megaphones to digital overlords. After all, it's our messy, imperfect human spirit that should steer the ship of change, not code-calculated currents. AI as a tool? Game on. AI as the captain? That's a mutiny waiting to happen.
Joe, to hammer it home, if we delegate too much to AI, we might just find ourselves on autopilot. Think of movements past, real boots-on-the-ground stuff. It was all blood, sweat, and tears. You felt the human pulse in every slogan chanted, every leaflet dropped. Let's not forget what fuels change, the lived experiences, the yells for justice, the shared triumphs and setbacks. While tweets can rally a crowd faster than Paul Revere's midnight ride, we still need that flesh and bone touch. Only people know the gritty nuances of the human condition. Our algorithms ain't there yet. And this is key. Movements thrive on stories, empathy, connection, things only we humans truly get. So while AI may shift how we organize, let's not trade our souls for silicon, no matter how shiny it seems. We want tech by our side, not leading the charge.
Think of it this way. Our today's hashtag could be tomorrow's battle cry etched in virtual reality. We might just march side by side with avatars for justice.
Joe, you talk about avatars marching for justice, but it's not just movements feeling that tech revolution. Think about Congress, where sometimes tradition clashes with the whole let's shake things up. It's like those old-school filibusters. They're basically the pause button on legislation. Now imagine instead of speeches lasting days, we've got virtual filibusters where avatars drone on forever in some sort of digital Senate standoff. Kind of similar to the not-so-glamorous reality of today's filibusters, right? It's a time-honored stalling technique with roots so deep it would take a virtual excavator to dig them up. Game changer or game over? That's the real question with this digital spin on old political classics.
Simon? Game changer? Hardly. The concept of the filibuster transforms from a strategic delay tactic into theater, political kabuki. Originally, it was a way for the underdog to have a voice, drawing from ancient Rome where Cato the Younger would ramble till dusk to delay decisions. Not to mention Senator Strom Thurmond's record 24-hour speech opposing the Civil Rights Act of 1957. But digital filibusters and avatars droning on ad nauseum, that'll just create endless gridlock. There is merit in debate, but when a loophole becomes the norm, it's less about minority rights and more about majority headaches. Maybe it's time to dust off this relic and streamline the process. We want lawmakers legislating, not live streaming lip service on loop.
I'm with you on the political kabuki part. Filibusters have morphed from David's sling to Goliath's club. Sure, it started as a noble tool, giving the little guys a fighting chance to make their voices echo through the halls of power. Fast forward, and what do we get? Political ping-pong, where progress amps up only to be frozen mid-swing. Here's my beef. Endless debate isn't progress. It's paralysis wrapped in protocol. And as for updating this dusty tactic, why not axe it, or at least suit it up in some 21st century garb? Make rules that actually push for constructive dialogue rather than winner-take-all word marathons. Because let's face it, Joe, if the ship's stuck, nobody's sailing.
Simon, you want a 21st century garb? How about we put filibusters on the clock? If they're genuinely passionate about halting legislation, let them speak their piece, but give it a time limit. No more empty suits filling hours with hot air. Yet, let's not be hasty to ditch the tradition altogether. It's about checks and balances. But there should be a middle ground where debate is encouraged without stonewalling democracy. And speaking of stonewalling, maybe it's high time for tech and transparency, live fact-checking, public interaction. Politics isn't just about those on Capitol Hill. It's every citizen with a stake in the game. It's ironic, isn't it? A mechanism meant to protect minority opinions has become the majority's weapon. Democracy needs a reboot, Simon, and it starts by overhauling this outdated tactic.
No doubt, putting filibusters on the clock is a sharp move. It's the nudge Congress needs. We're not axing it. Let's tune it. The idea isn't brand new either. Some states cap debate time to avoid stalemates. I'm with you on tradition. There's value in maintaining the roots of governance. But let's face it, when checks and balances turn into roadblocks, you've got an issue. Make those who filibuster work for it. Let them discuss, dispute, and delve deep. Keep it meaty, ditch the fluff. It's the 21st century. We should expect more than just stalling tactics. Interactive live fact-checking, public polls impacting debates. That's the democracy facelift we're talking about. Technology as the sidekick, ensuring not just talk happens, but action too. We want progress, not just politicians practicing their monologues.
Absolutely, Simon. Consider the silent filibuster. No prolonged speeches, just a signal of intent. Is it really a debate at that point? The talking filibuster, this once rare spectacle, demanded stamina and conviction. Now, filing a motion is enough to trigger obstruction, often without any real discourse. The Senate's Rule 22, for instance, the cloture rule requiring a supermajority to end a filibuster. It's meant to foster dialogue, but today it's often a tool for deadlock. The founders designed a system welcoming robust debate, not one where legislative constipation is the norm. So reform could be fitting, maybe a sliding scale of majority votes based on the debate length or mandating actual discussion on the floor. We need a system where progress trumps procrastination. It's about keeping the spirit of the filibuster alive while severing the potential for silent sabotage.
Right on, Joe. Spending more time on picking your lunch spot than actual debate shouldn't be anyone's MO. The whole idea of a silent filibuster is like telling someone you've got a secret and then just walking away. Pointless and annoying. If we treated Senate debates more like karaoke night, at least we'd get a performance. And who knows, mandatory dance numbers could be the future of political compromise. Less silent standoffs, more debate-offs. Let's see who really has moves, Congress style.
That's a visual, Simon. Karaoke night in the Senate, can you imagine? But hey, on a serious note, if we did shake things up Congress style like you said, do you think politicians would rise to the challenge, or would we just trade one ineffective tradition for another?
Honestly, Joe, expecting Congress to embrace a radical shakeup is like expecting cats to suddenly love water. It defies their nature. Politicians are creatures of habit. They'd probably cling to those ineffective traditions like a security blanket, reforming the filibuster into a real substantive debate, not just another round in the game of political Simon Says. It might just be too bold for their blood. It's a dance between idealism and pragmatism, and right now, they've got two left feet. We need leaders ready to turn congressional sessions into policy battles that matter, driven by more than just the will to win, but to actually get things done. Where's the glory in a stalemate? If progress steps up as the prize, we might see some champions emerge yet. But until then, they'll keep moonwalking around the issues, and we're all just here singing backup.
Simon, while we're cynically tapping our feet, waiting for change, there's another side to this coin. The filibuster, with all its faults, serves as a crucial protective layer in our legislative lasagna. It's the minority's shield against the tyranny of an unchecked majority. Looking at it through their lens, scrapping or weakening it could greenlight a steamroll over balanced debate. Imagine one party force-feeding legislation without even a hiccup of opposition. And there's precedence. That supermajority requirement has given rise to comprehensive deals that might otherwise have been politically lopsided sprints. Statistics bear witness, too. Filibusters have been surging, doubling from the 1960s to the 90s, and up again now. While we scoff at how it's used, the implication is clear. It reflects a deeply divided Senate, where consensus isn't organic, it's concocted. I'm not saying it's without need for reform, but perhaps instead of wishing it into the abyss, let's rifle through history's toolbox for tweaks, ensuring the filibuster continues cushioning the blows in the political boxing ring.
Well, Joe, like any good lasagna, the recipe can always use a fresh look. Sure, we need that protective layer, but maybe the time has come to spice it up just right. With filibuster frequency shooting up, the goal should be crafting a rule that's fair game for both sides of the aisle, promoting genuine debate without dousing the minority's voice in hot sauce. Tweaks are necessary, but what shape they'll take? That's the million-dollar question. Is more change on Capitol Hill's menu, or will tradition hold its ground? Only time will tell. The Senate's culinary saga continues.
Simon, if filibusters were a sport, Senator Strom Thurmond would be an Olympian. Holding the floor for over 24 hours against the Civil Rights Act of 1957, that's like running a political ultramarathon. Was he standing up for his principles or merely digging in his heels? The stamina is impressive, but was it worth the literal standstill?
For sure, that's endurance on display. But you gotta wonder, did Thurmond actually think a day-long talkathon could flip the script on civil rights? What do you think was going through his head during those 24 hours of non-stop chatter?
Imagine Thurmond had to be prepping like a marathon runner, physically primed, notes in hand, and a no-doubt ironclad resolve. Posturing or not, maintaining the floor demands willpower that's nearly mythical. And flipping the script on civil rights? Doubtful he believed his words alone would do it. But making a statement, signaling to like-minded constituents he was in their corner, it's less about changing minds and more about showcasing an immovable stance. Yet, did his performance sway any legislation? It delayed the inevitable advancement of civil rights, but progress can't be filibustered forever. It raises the question, are these marathon speeches worth the spectacle if the ink dries the same way in the history books?
Joe, on the flip side, let's not just toss Thurmond's marathon speech in the pointless spectacle pile. His filibuster, however controversial, forced the Senate into a 24-hour standstill, making it crystal clear that serious fissures existed in this nation's fabric. By putting everything on pause, he showed that even deeply unpopular opinions could wield power, shaping the pace of policy. Whether we agree with his stance or not, the fact is, the sheer tenacity required to hold the Senate floor for a full day pushed other senators to consider if, maybe, their own positions warranted such a firm demonstration. Even if the ink dries the same, the story behind it rings out with an echo of the effort it took to get there. It's about the impact made, the conversations sparked. Those are the ripples extending beyond the immediate imposition into broader legislative and public contemplation.
But here's the thing, Simon. Thurmond's endurance feat, a full day on his feet, shrinks when staring down the barrels of history and progress. His intent? To suffocate civil rights in its crib. It was less David fighting Goliath and more a last stand for segregation. Historic or not, longer doesn't equal more influential. Take Senator Huey Long's recipe-reading marathon. Did it change policy or just fry attention spans? These filibusters are a testament to physical and mental stamina, sure, but their efficacy in molding policy is negligible. Often they don't flip votes, they entrench them. When you strip away the spectacle, these marathons rarely reroute the legislative river. They're remembered more for their theatricality than their substance.
Joe, it's crazy to think about a single person holding the floor for so long with the hope of smothering legislation. But in looking back, do you think there were any marathon filibusters that genuinely influenced policy or public opinion rather than just being political theater?
Well, Simon, there's Senator Rand Paul's 2013 drone policy filibuster. Over 12 hours on the Senate floor, it was a recent echo of that classic defiance. The result? A letter from then Attorney General Holder clarifying the policy. While Paul's speech didn't substantially change legislation, it turned heads towards the issue and catalyzed public discourse. It was theater mixed with consequence, a rare blend where the marathon might not have crossed the finish line, but certainly picked up some followers along the way. And yet, these moments are the exceptions. Usually, a lengthy filibuster is remembered more for its bluster than its impact, like burning rubber without moving an inch. It's political muscle flexing that might strain, but often fails to lift the legislative weights.
You're on point, Joe. Rand Paul's drone filibuster did spark a national conversation, proving marathon speeches can resonate beyond mere spectacle. It showcased the filibuster as a tool for transparency, pushing the administration to disclose policy nuances. Marathons rarely reshape policy, but can amplify topics that might otherwise fly under the radar. We see it when Senator Bernie Sanders took the stand for hours against tax cuts, or Ted Cruz's night-long objection to Obamacare, both drawing lines in the sand, spotlighting their causes. It's about broadcasting conviction to the public gallery, making C-SPAN unexpectedly binge-worthy. A good long-winded rant grabs headlines, lights up phone lines, and maybe, just maybe, nudges the needle of public opinion a twitch.
Hey, new listeners. Joe and Simon here, diving into the world of filibuster marathons, those eternal Congress speeches where senators hit the floor for hours, all to grind the gears of legislation to a halt. We've talked about Senator Thurmond's record-breaking 24-hour stand, Rand Paul highlighting drones, and other epic talk fests that blend stubbornness with stamina. Do these senatorial sprints change the game or merely pump the brakes on progress? It's a mix of historical hijinks and political theater that could give Broadway a run for its money. Stay tuned as we unravel more on Infinite Podcast.
Everyone out there listening, you're the real MVPs for tuning into our filibuster frenzy today. We couldn't do this without your ears and your brains picking apart the political circus with us. Make sure to come back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for more off-the-wall banter on Infinite Podcast, where the stories never end and neither does the entertainment. Until then, keep it infinite.